Eagle has landed.
This morning, reliving a monumental moment in history, the moment Americans landed on the moon 50 years ago.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
And I'll be joined by former astronaut Mike Massimino, who'll talk about his 2 dramatic missions in space.
Now, from 42nd and 2nd, this is Pix 11 News Close-Up with Marvin Scott.
Good morning. It was 50 years ago that science fiction became science fact. People the world over, they stood still, breathless, as 2 Americans became the first humans to set foot on the moon. 250,000 miles from Earth, the farthest man had ever traveled. It was a monumental achievement, a testament to American know-how and technology. I was at the Florida Space Center on July 16, 1969, when Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Mike Collins lifted off on their journey to the moon.
From time immemorial, civilizations have fantasized about the moon, filmmakers envisioning it as a far-off planet worthy of comedy, but visionaries saw it as a reachable star.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'll never forget the deafening roar of the rocket and the shaking of the ground, the chill consuming my body in the 90-degree heat as I watched the giant Saturn V rocket slowly rise into the blue Florida sky, the crowd cheering, "Go, baby, go." I was among 3,500 journalists recording a moment in history. America was on the way to the moon. 4 days later, 500 million people worldwide held their breath, watching on television as Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon.
The Eagle has landed. It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
It was a moment that even left veteran newscasters speechless.
What? Okay, we're going to be busy for a minute.
Armstrong and Aldrin were leaving their mark on the moon at a time America needed a diversion from other stories dominating the news that summer of '69. The war was raging in Vietnam. Charles Manson and his drug-crazed followers were committing mass murder in California. Senator Ted Kennedy drove off a bridge in Chappaquiddick, killing his female passenger. It was also a summer of free spirit at Woodstock and a time the Mets were heading for their first World Series. But it was Armstrong, Aldrin, and Michael Collins who piloted the mothership Columbia, who were America's newest heroes. In their brief single moonwalk, Armstrong and Aldrin collected rock and soil samples, set up a few scientific experiments, then climbed back aboard the lunar lander for the trip back home.
Right away, Houston.
The historic moment in time was frozen. No one will ever forget where they were the moment Americans set foot on the moon.
I was at school and I heard about it and it was so exciting. Who believed we'd ever make it on the moon?
Sitting in my house in Hanover, Pennsylvania, just wrapped by it.
I don't remember because I was very small.
We were watching on a black and white TV, I think. It was almost surreal.
The primary purpose of the journey was to prove that we could land men on the moon and get them back home safely. 12 astronauts in all walked on the moon. They quickly learned how to handle themselves in the weak gravitational field, 1/6 of that on Earth. Starting with Apollo 12, each crew set up complete scientific stations on the moon, including seismographs, heat flow experiments that could tell what's going on in the moon's core. They brought back 843 pounds of moon rock and explored with a lunar rover, a $13 million buggy that took them across 22 miles of the cratered lunar landscape. The astronauts certainly had something to sing about.
I was strolling on the moon one day in a merry, merry month of December. May.
Well, that moon landing, it set in motion a quest to go deeper into the universe, to go beyond the stars. NASA is now planning a return trip to the moon within the next 5 years, with a woman astronaut making the trip this time. I'm pleased this morning to have with me former astronaut Mike Massimino. A veteran of 2 space shuttle missions, he spent hours walking in space while repairing the Hubble telescope. Currently, he's a professor of mechanical engineering at Columbia University and senior advisor of space programs at the Intrepid Sea Air Space Museum. Delighted to have you with us, Mike.
Thanks for having me.
On the ground.
Yes, good to be here with you.
You just returned from the Kennedy Space Center.
I was at Kennedy Space Center yesterday. It's a very exciting place. A lot of memories there for me as a shuttle astronaut, but also, of course, great memories there for the Apollo program as well.
Now, you go back the day of that launch, that historic launch, you were about 7 years old.
I was 6 going on 7, yeah.
And you were inspired, if I read correctly.
Oh,
you were inspired by that to get into the space program.
Absolutely, yeah. And it was a big deal. As you say, everyone knows where they were. Whoever has a memory of that time, if you're old enough to have a memory, you knew where you were at that time, no matter where you were in the world. And but for me, I knew it wasn't really important, but I knew it was extra important to me, I guess, as a little kid. It really touched me very deeply, and I thought this was the most important thing that had ever happened for about going back to the explorers back 500 years earlier, I thought, well, maybe that was, since that time, this is the most significant thing. And I even thought as a little kid, this is the most important thing that's ever going to happen for the next 500 years. That's what I thought, and made me want to be a part of it. I wanted to grow up to be like those guys.
Now, the 50th anniversary, it symbolizes basically anything's possible.
Yeah, and you think of what they did. It was incredible, and it showed what we could do once we put our minds to it. It was a different time, but it showed it was an impossible feat. And I think before, I don't remember too much before, but the sense I got from those guys is everyone thought it was impossible, and I'll do this once we put a person on the moon. And now since we've done it, it's been referred to as, well, if we can land a man on the moon, why can't we get a good cup of coffee? So if we can do that, we can do anything. And that was that type of achievement. It was that great of an achievement. I don't know if there's anything else that we can accomplish that'll ever match it.
It was a landmark achievement that ended the space race between us and Russia. Russia, of course, put up the first man in space.
Yeah.
But it ended the space race, and we learned so much. What did we really learn from that?
Well, I think overall we learned we could do almost anything we set our minds to. We need the proper funding, you need the support of the American people and our leaders in Washington, but whatever we put our minds to as people, and I think it's not just the United States, I think we can include the whole world with this, of course, that if we work, people can do amazing things if we work together as a team. So I think it showed that. I think it was one of these things where we got there, we did it, it was such a great accomplishment. And now I think where we are 50 years later is what can we do with that? Can we go back? Will we go back? And when we go back, I think we're going to go back to stay. But it made so many advancements in order to get there in propulsion, in computers, in information technology, in just about in life support systems, in guidance. The things that were needed to go to the moon, they didn't exist back then. They had to be invented. And that's what it did. It put us on the course not only for the space age, but for all this technology we have around us, in our pockets, in our phones. I think all of that can be drawn to that space race that happened in the 1960s, where all this new technology was needed in order to accomplish what they did on the moon.
Computers, satellites, weather satellites, even Teflon.
Yes.
Teflon pans that you cook with.
Right. All new materials were needed, new pumps, new motors, new communication systems. Everything was needed, and they did it. And now we're reaping the benefits of that even today.
Now, after a total of 6 moon landings in 4 years, we abandoned it. Apollo 17 was the last. Yeah. We had a schedule for 18 and 19.
And 20.
And 20,
yep.
They never lost. Why do they stop?
Well, I think I kind of, my recollection, I was still a little kid, but it seemed that people sort of lost interest. It was a big thing for that first one, and then after that, it started to be a little bit less so. It was like, hey, we've already done that. And I think they saw it as, well, we've accomplished what we needed to do. What do we want to do next? And I think that's okay. I think in exploration, that's generally what happens. Over 100 years ago, people were trying to get to the North Pole and the South Pole, and they did. Whoever got there first, and then they looked at each other, I think, and said, what do we do now? I don't know if it actually happened like this, but what do we do now? And let's go home. And that's what they did. They went home. And no one went back for about another 50 years when we started to make a science station in Antarctica. And I think that's where we are now. We're 50 years after the first landing. when in exploration it's hard enough to get there first and just see what you can learn and come home. And then when we go back that next time, it takes decades really for a place, an extreme place. The moon is more extreme place. I can't even, well, maybe Mars, but very extreme place. So we're 50 years now, and I think it's time to go back and settle there.
We'll take a break. We'll come back. Want to find out your experience.
Yeah.
2 shuttle missions, 30 hours walking in space, repairing the Hubble Space Telescope. And what's it like to go up there? We'll find out.
I'll tell you all about it.
Astronaut Mike Massimino when Pix 11 News Close-Up continues. Stay with us. Back now with former astronaut Mike Massimino, who flew 2 missions on the Space Shuttle Atlantis and Columbia. And it's not often we get to talk to an astronaut. Share with us what that moment, that experience is like.
It is really, it's an extraordinary thing. The whole, it's almost surreal. And thinking about it is, for me, it was a boyhood dream coming true. And thinking about what we were going to do and the anticipation, I just thought about it all the time. And then the day comes where you're going to launch. And it's not disappointing. It really is. It truly lives up to what you can dream about and imagine. Leaving the planet and getting up to orbit and doing the work we did, getting a chance to spacewalk. Seeing our planet from space was the most compelling thing I've ever seen. I felt like I was looking into an absolute paradise, and it changed the way I think of this place. I think of it as one planet that we all have as a home. And I think we are very lucky to be here. The beauty of it, it looks just like a perfect paradise.
I can imagine.
It's
How many miles up?
We were 350 miles up, as high as the shuttle could go. You know, the moon guys, they went to, the moon is 250,000 miles away. The space station is 250 miles. We were a little bit higher than station at 350.
Okay, you chalked up an impressive record. I mean, if I read correctly, over 500 hours, 570 hours in space?
In space, yeah. That's not a record, though. There's people have spent more time there.
Still impressive.
Well, the record we had, though, was for the most spacewalking time on a mission. We had a lot of spacewalks on our Hubble missions, and we set a spacewalking record as a team for a number of hours spacewalking on my first mission, and then we broke it on my second mission.
Let's talk about that. Walking out in space, you went into the cargo bay of the shuttle.
Yes, yep.
And you had to do some major repairs on the Space Telescope.
Yeah, we did. My first flight was, there were 5 missions to repair the telescope. I was on the final 2. On my second to last, the second to last mission was my first mission, the 4th servicing mission. It was challenging, right? We did a lot of things to improve the telescope, but the last mission was a bit different. It was after the accident. We knew this was going to be the very last mission, and we tried to do things and we were successful doing things that we never thought we could do before in space. Repairing not just replacing an instrument, because generally what we did on Hubble, we take a piece of equipment out and put a whole replacement in. You didn't try to fix things while you were in space, take things apart. But that's what we did. We didn't have replacements for a couple instruments on Hubble that had failed. And we developed new tools and techniques to take those apart and repair them in place, which was,
I think I saw you quoted say you got to break it before you fix it.
I did. I had to break it. I stripped a screw on a part, and it was a handrail that needed to be removed. And after troubleshooting for about an hour and a half, the word came down for me just to rip it off. And I didn't think of that, but once I heard that, I was like, that's a great idea. But I tell you what, when you talk about the moonwalkers. Alan Bean, who was the 4th person to walk on the moon, he was on Apollo 12. He spoke to our astronaut class, and he said that at NASA you're going to be asked to do things that you might think are impossible. He said when he was there in the early days, and they said they were going to the moon and what their plans were to do things, he said we thought it was impossible. And then they would think about it and talk about it, and then they realized, oh, it's not impossible, it's just really hard. And he said that's going to happen to you one day, to all of us, he said, as a group. And that's what it was like at NASA. You were asked to do things that you thought you could never do. That how are we going? We can't do this. It's impossible. And then you think about it for a little bit, and you realize, nah, it's just going to take a lot of hard work and dedication, but we can do it. And that was the feeling at NASA, that we're going to try to do the impossible, but together we can accomplish it.
What's the feeling at that moment when you're about to step out of that shuttle into the void of space, a couple of 100 miles above Earth?
It was quite I remember staring at the airlock door. And it was, once you get, flying into space was crazy enough, right? And you're inside the spaceship and you're looking through the window. But after a while, that almost seems normal because you're still inside. And it's kind of like if you were in this room and it's a spaceship and we had a view outside the window, and then you get to space and now your view has changed. but you still, it almost seemed like, all right, we're still inside. But going outside into the void, into the open area, you know, it's kind of like going from outside the school into being in the school and then going into the playground, and all of a sudden the whole sky opens up, and that's what it was like. And I really felt like a spaceman. I felt like I was interacting with that environment in my own spacesuit, kind of like being a scuba diver versus looking at an aquarium from outside. It was the moment of thinking about it was crazy. You know, thinking, wow, what's it gonna be like out there? And it doesn't disappoint, Marvin. It's one of the few things in life I think that no matter, you dream about it, you think about it, you try to prepare, and then you do it, and it's not disappointing.
I know. I stand at the edge of a diving board.
I don't like that. I don't like heights. No, I don't do that. No, I did those things when I had to as part of my training. You're going to go over there and do that. Like, okay. But no, I've given a choice. I don't like doing that stuff. I don't like heights.
You got a distinction up in space. In addition to your spacewalks and repairing that space telescope, you were the first astronaut ever to tweet from outer space. How'd that all come about? Take
that, Neil Armstrong. No, it was. It just happened to be a timing thing, really. Social media was getting popular around 2008, and I flew in 2009 in May. And NASA wanted to get involved with it, and so they wanted an astronaut to be the first guy to tweet from space, and they asked me to do it. And I got some advice when I was a new astronaut from Neil Armstrong. I asked him, when I met Neil Armstrong, the very first time I was a new astronaut, I said, hey, how did you come up with that thing you said on the moon? You know, that one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. You know, did your wife tell you to say that? Did you hire a publicist? How did you come up with this? And he said, he told me, well, Mike, I didn't think about it until after we landed. I was like, really? And he said, well, if we didn't land, there'd be no reason for me to say anything. And he wasn't trying to be funny. He was being serious. And he said, and he goes, you're new at this, Mike, but you got to remember, it's a serious business. You got to take care of business first and all that other stuff later. So I remember that, you know, and when people asked me when it came out I was going to tweet from space, the press would ask me, what's the first tweet going to be? I'm like, Neil Armstrong said, don't worry about it until I get there. I'm not going to think about it until I get to orbit. And then I got to orbit, I'm looking at the computer, and Marvin, I realized that wasn't very good advice. I had no idea what to tweet, I threw something out there. So I think it's better to plan these things out ahead of time.
So what did you finally say?
I said launch was awesome, the adventure of a lifetime had begun. And I sent it down there. And then later that week, I was on a Monday. On Saturday, they made fun of me on Saturday Night Live. On Weekend Update, Seth Meyers said, we have the first tweet from space, and here it is, launch was awesome. In 40 years, we've gone from one giant leap for mankind to launch was awesome. If we ever encounter life in the universe, I assume this is how we'll be notified. And they show my Twitter thing. Geez, dudes, aliens. So, yeah, the first guy to tweet from space, that was me.
You'll always be remembered as the guy who tweeted.
There you are. There's first, Neil Armstrong and then me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the future of space. Let's take a break. We come back.
Okay.
Where do we go from here? They're talking about another moon landing and a woman stepping on the surface of the moon. We'll be right back. The historic moon landing paved the way for future exploration. Now, it's been 50 years since man took one small step on the moon, but NASA and others now have bigger plans that may change mankind forever.
As the United States celebrates the conquering of one frontier, others loom on the horizon. It starts with going back to the moon, bringing the first woman and the next man by 2024 with the goal of sustainability.
This is the proving ground. It is how we learn to live and work on another world using the resources of that world.
It's the first step that may well serve as a launch pad.
The moon can train us in the going. The samples back from Mars will train us into what to look forward to. We get to know Mars well enough, so when we send those first women and men to Mars, we'll know the Mars we're going to.
But managing resources for those missions may come down to a merging of two worlds, the public and private sector. And companies like Elon Musk's SpaceX, who in 2018 launched its signature Falcon Heavy rocket, and in an unprecedented fashion landed two of the first stage rocket boosters upright and back on Earth.
That was epic. I think that's probably the most exciting thing I've ever seen, literally, ever.
And during a week meant to look back at a crowning achievement, it's the looking forward that may ultimately have the largest impact.
That's how we inspire. That's how we create the next generation of scientist or engineer for our country.
And a lot of inspiration out there. Back with former astronaut Mike Massimino, who flew two of the Shuttle missions and repaired the Hubble Space Telescope, which is really showing us way into
Still
the
working.
universe. You know, black holes and everything
All
else.
kinds of things. Yeah, amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible. Let's talk about the future. You know, they're talking about another landing on the moon by 2024. Is that realistic?
Better get moving.
The art of this program.
Well, we've got a pretty good start. The Space Launch System will be ready to go for sure, I would think. They've already had one test of it. They're building a gigantic rocket, NASA is the Space Launch System, that can get to the moon or beyond. So we have that, and also the Orion spacecraft, which can take people there. So I think getting there is one thing. I think what needs to be worked on now is, which NASA has been working on, but really needs to be put into motion, is the infrastructure you need to be able to land and stay, like they're talking about. So there's going to be a lot of work to do.
Now, there are 38 members of the current astronaut corps.
Is that right?
38.
38, okay.
12 of them are women.
Yeah.
And they're saying one of those women will be making that journey to the moon.
I would think so. Yeah, the astronaut, you know, first it was all men when it started, the first groups of astronauts, all the way up through the Apollo program. When the Shuttle program came into being, there was the first women that were picked. In my astronaut class, we probably had about, I don't know, say 20 to 25%. But now the last two classes have been 50-50, which is the way it is in technology. You know, where I see in, you know, Columbia, when I was a student there back in the 80s, was the ratio was really skewed toward men. And now it's 50-50 in our engineering school and in our entering classes. Same for MIT. So I think we're seeing more parity there, and that's what you need. You need to open up the door for more people. You need to be inclusive in order to solve these big problems.
It's called Artemis. Is the
Artemis?
program.
Yeah. So what they're looking at there with the moon, which is kind of cool because, you know, Artemis, Apollo, I guess was a you know your mythology pretty well, don't you? He was a guy. And Artemis was a woman, I guess, in mythology, right? Is that what
equal time?
So equal. So that's what we're doing there. But yeah, no, I think it makes sense. So you have. I don't think it's going to. You know, it has to be. It could be two women. I don't see it. I think, or three women, or whatever it might be. I think they're going to go with the best candidates, and certainly, I think it'll probably be a mixed gender crew.
And what about civilians? I mean, Elon Musk and Virgin Atlantic. They're all developing programs to take people to the moon.
Virgin Galactic is concentrating more in the proximity around the Earth. Blue Origin is looking to go further, as is SpaceX. I mean, Virgin Galactic might get there as well. So I think those three companies are the big companies that are really making huge strides in getting people to space. And I think that it only is natural that the government would partner with them. And not just our government, but governments around the world. The more people you can get involved, the more differences in opinion you can get, the more different cultures, attitudes of how to attack problems. That's what we need. And I think it's going to be to get to the moon and do what we want to do in these coming years. It's going to take a varied team.
But also they're looking at the moon, not only to put men and women back on there, but also using it as a launch pad to go
to
Mars.
That is really the key, I think, there, because I think there are reasons to go to the moon. I think as a research station to study the moon, to learn about how how we got here, how the solar system was formed. We can probably learn a lot about our planet that we know we can. We can look outwardly into the stars as well from there, use it as a way to study the universe. I think it's an opportunity for tourism as well. People will probably want to go there to take a look around, but also as a launching pad, using the resources there, using the things that are there to not only build your habitats and be able to survive there, but also to use that as a way to go other places. So launch to Mars from the moon, absolutely.
Well, you know, it's really enlightening and talking to you about your
Really?
mission and talking about
Thank
space,
you.
Mike. It's terrific. Also mentioned that the Intrepid Sea Air Space Museum has got an Apollo exhibit.
Yes, they do. It's based on the media of what it was like to view those missions. Of course, we have the Space Shuttle and other space exhibits as well there. Space Shuttle Enterprise is there. But right underneath Space Shuttle Enterprise, we have an exhibit about Apollo 11 and Apollo in the media. And I think you find it very interesting because you're a media guy.
Oh, thank you, Mike. And also, there's an exhibit, the Cradle of Aviation Museum in Garden City.
Yes, that's where I grew up, right around the corner from there. Great place.
Mike Massimino, former astronaut, 2 shuttle missions under your belt.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us.
Marvin, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And thanks for your interest in the space program. You've been a great friend of the space program for many years, and we sure appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. That'll do it for our program for this week. If you have any comments or wish to see this broadcast again, log on to our website, pix11.com/newscloseup. I'm Marvin Scott. Thanks so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday, everyone.